20 years ago, on September 11th, 2001, America was rocked by 19 terrorists who hijacked 4 commercial airplanes and committed the deadliest attack ever on American soil. Texans from afar watched in horror as American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the World Trade Center, causing both towers to catch fire and collapse. A third flight, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the Pentagon, causing a partial collapse of the building's west wall. And a fourth flight, United Airlines Flight 93, which was intended for the U.S. Capitol or White House, was overcome by passengers and crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. In the wake of the attack, after the fires were extinguished, the debris sorted, and the dust settled, our national anthem's prophetic lyrics rang loudly from coast to coast, from the highest mountains to the lowest valleys. Amidst the smoldering wreckage and rubble, our flag was still there. After 20 years, the wounds remain unhealed, the scars remain visible, and the memory of that day remains seared into the minds of those who lived through it.
It's hard to believe that it's been 20 years since 9/11. I was an assistant principal in Deer Park on morning duty in the cafeteria when the principal's wife called and told him to go into his office and turn on the news. So we're in his office and we're watching replays of the first tower being struck, kind of confused, really not understanding at that point what was really going on. And then we see the second tower hit, and then we knew immediately that our country was under attack, first time on American soil, and so it was just a devastating time for our country and just really hard to believe that it's been 20 years.
On 9/11 was very interesting for me. I was 1,000 months pregnant with my daughter, and I was working at the medical center at the time. We were on the road, and I had a carpool to go in because you can't park at the medical center. And we heard it and we're like, this must be a joke, because we were listening to the radio. This is a weird joke. And we kept listening to it because I was driving from Alvin down 288. And by the time we got to work, everybody was just completely silent. I have never seen the medical center completely silent. It was like a ghost town. We get to our department and we're just kind of sitting there, and all of us are looking at each other, and we're going, what's going on? What's going on? And the next thing you know, all of our doctors come in, and they're like, this is what we're doing. And they just started immediately packing up stuff, supplies, how they're going to get there. It was the doctors, the residents, the nurses, and I was one of the assistants, and we were just packing up stuff, how we could get there as fast as we can. At approximately noon, the doctor's like, okay, we're good. And then they all sent us home so that we could be with our families. And I drove home. The first thing I did is I picked up my daughter. She was 4 at daycare, and my husband came home with us. And that's all we did for the rest of the day was just kind of hugged, kind of chilled, didn't do anything, and was just kind of like our hearts were all in what was going on with him. We were hugging each other going, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here.
All right, so I was teaching math. And it was second period. I was in my conference period. I was grading papers. And Janet Reed, she was a social studies teacher. We were both out on the Edgebrook parking lot that year in an annex because they were renovating the F Hall. And she runs into my room. She's like, oh my God, Larry, we're under attack. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So she turns on my TV, and the tower 1 is on fire. And then all of a sudden the second plane, like they were doing a news interview or something, and you see the second plane like flying to the second tower, so we're like freaking out. And then there's a news flash that the Pentagon's been hit and that all these planes have been hijacked, and so we're trying to be calm, but nobody knows what's going on. And then all of a sudden they make an announcement that we are staying in second period, and anybody who's on conference needs to report to the front office immediately. And so like we run down there because we don't know what's going on, and there are hundreds of parents in cars and taxis, motorcycles, I think whatever they could get their hands on, and they're here to pick up their kids because some rumor or something on the news that the ship channel was going to get hit next. And so everybody was freaking out and coming to get their kids and leaving town. And the rest of the day is just a blur.
Well, it was the first year teaching for me. So when the news came in, we didn't have like classroom or anything in our classrooms, but we would take turns going to the library and just watching it on TV. And then whenever you start to see the kids, like the parents coming and picking up the kids, I taught third grade at the time, and just the fear kind of, and because they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. And so just having to be the comfort for them, for the third graders, and then, but still wondering, what does this mean for America? What does this mean for us? Like, are there really going to be more things happening? And
I was in the United States Army. I was an NCO, and I was actually at work. We had a Earth terminal facility in the South Pacific on an island, on the Ryukyu Island chain, on an island called Okinawa. And so when the first plane hit, we were kind of like, what was that? And when the second plane hit, we were like, oh no. And so it happened to be, we were in the middle of a typhoon when it happened. And so they made us go get our weapons, and we went to Tharacon Delta, full security, QRF fell in place. And it was just wow, shock. Months. We were total lockdown. You couldn't do anything. Everything was heightened security. And so it was, for us, it was a nightmare, especially being overseas for the military.
I was here at South Houston. It was my first year. I had just gotten out of first period soccer and was going in my classroom where we still had TVs on the wall. And as the kids walked into second period, watching them, the interactions they were having with each other, not kind of believing it. And then when the towers came down and we watched it on live TV, it got really quiet in class. And it was really hard because it took a while to kind of digest and analyze what was going on. And I think it was a moment that will forever mark my first year of teaching.
Well, it was my second day in Japan, and I was at teacher training to become an ESL teacher, and the news broke. And of course, there's an American military base close by where I was living in Hiroshima, and there was a lot of panic. People were scared. People really didn't understand what was going on. We heard that a lot of the military bases were becoming very active and packing up and getting ready to go to where they need to go. And so there was a lot of fear and uncertainty. My parents were calling me from Ireland saying, come home now. And I suppose that was the scariest thing. Like, it was so unexpected and nobody could ever believe that something like that would happen.
Well, 20 years ago, that's actually my first year where I had already graduated high school and I was already working in downtown. So when that happened, I was already going to work, and then I found out about it, and it was just really chaotic because a lot of people were trying to get outside of downtown, and I was trying to wait for my ride, and it took forever because everybody was trying to get out instead of in. So I even remember when HOV lane, where they even reversed the lanes because everybody was trying to get out, and it was just a little bit.
20 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school. We were actually outside in the front, in the courtyard, and I remember my friends saying, hey, have you heard the news? We were like, what's going on? So the Twin Towers. And we're like, we didn't know what was that. And we didn't go to first period until 8:45. That's the time we went in. And once we got into first period, we stayed there all day long. And we watched the Channel 1. That was a channel back then. Channel 1 for high school. And that's all we watched all day, about the Twin Towers, the crashes. And it was just something that we didn't know the magnitude of it. We couldn't measure how much it was going to affect us in the future. It was just something, a day to remember.
I was in the second grade when it happened. It was something we weren't aware of until it just started happening, like a lot of people were. We were all taken to the cafeteria. They rolled in on carts these big TVs, and we watched as the towers fell. And it wasn't great. I didn't understand what exactly was happening until I got home. My mom was at home crying because she had friends in New York. And when it hit, it hit finally, and we haven't been the same since then.
20 years ago, I can remember I was over at Clear Lake High School, and I remember walking by the library and I saw this TV that was on and a couple of kids in front of it. And at the time I thought, well, they shouldn't be watching that movie, you know, because I couldn't hear what it was. I couldn't really see what it was, but I could see a building on fire. So I walked to the office, and on my way back, there was another TV, there were more kids, and there was 2 buildings on fire. And it was weird because, you know, I got the feeling, why are they watching that movie? You know, they shouldn't be watching that movie. I go to my classroom, and then it starts hitting that, you know, something's happened. So we start getting information that, you know, it had been bombed. And then my first initial feeling was, you know, this can't be happening. This doesn't happen here. It happens other places. It doesn't really happen to us. And so it's more of disbelief. We were trying to, you know, console kids. I had a kid that was in my class that had a uncle that was in one of the buildings at the time, and it was just a weird feeling. But I do remember that first football game, because I was a football coach, is being on the sideline of when we sang the national anthem, and it was a feeling of pride and, you know, togetherness. It's just a different feeling, but that whole day was just a mix of emotions, from disbelief to this can't be happening to we're angry, and then that football game, that first one where we got back on the sideline, and, you know, when you were standing there and you could hear that national anthem, it was awesome. It was just a great feeling inside.
So I was at my university. I was in a health class, and we were supposed to be taking a final. A student came in, said that we were under attack. The teacher didn't believe him, so we ended up having to take the test. I went into my dorm room and saw on the TV, all these people were watching the TV, and that was about the time that the second tower was hit, and we just kind of watched in disbelief as both the towers fell, and then I started calling my mom.
Okay, September 11th, 2001. I'm in what was Annex 12 at the time, now Annex 18. Actually have my sports medicine class in there. And we get the announcement that, you know, this is all going on. We all just kind of freeze and go into just shock mode. And we had volleyball that night. It was canceled, and I just spent the afternoon watching TV. Alan Jackson's song, Where Were You When the World Started Burning? That hits me when I hear that part, because that's where I was, in a classroom with innocent children.
So 20 years ago, I remember walking into second period. It's actually upstairs, K Hall. I graduated from South Houston. At that time, it wasn't the K Hall. They just had room numbers. But I remember walking into economics and my teacher saying that the World Trade Center had been hit. At that time, we just thought someone didn't miss a building. And then we sat and we watched the news, and you started learning about what was going on. And then we saw the second plane hit, and it just, everybody was in shock. We didn't know what was going on. We were all scared. We didn't have really cell phones back then. They weren't very popular then, so we couldn't get a hold of our families, and we're just, as seniors and as kids in school, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on.
So I was a paraprofessional working at actually MacArthur High School in Aldine ISD, and I was actually in my office, and then all of a sudden some of the high school students started coming in my office, and they're like, Miss, is it true? Is it true? And I said, was what true? What's going on? You know, because I didn't have access. We didn't have cell phones like with immediate feed, news feed and everything like that. And the kids came running in, and some were starting to cry, and these are high school kids coming into my office and crying, and they're like, are we under attack? And I said, what are you talking about? And then they started telling me how a plane had hit one of the World Trade Centers, and then not that much longer later, the second one hit, and we kind of scrambled to find a TV, get it in the band hall area so the kids could actually sit and kind of try and watch the news. And I was thinking to myself, wow, you know, I'm scared, because here you hear about the World Trade Center, then you heard about the Pentagon, and then another plane was hijacked. And guess what? You know, we're over here in a major ship channel area with all these chemical plants around us. And I was like, oh my gosh, even the kids were just like, are we next? And then I started worrying about my son. My son was with his babysitter. And I'm just thinking, man, I really want to get get over there to my son and just kind of hold him. And then all the parents started coming and picking up their kids. And so we just kind of shut down, and the school shut down. Kids stayed in place, and parents were allowed to come and start picking up their kids and taking them home. And I just remember, like, that Sunday, churches were flooded with people. This impacted my family because my brother was actually an active reserve Army guy, and he got reactivated, and so he got deployed out there. So he did another probably 3 years in the military where they wouldn't even let him get out. So they kept reactivating him and reactivating him.
The day of the 9/11 attacks, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room. I myself was having surgery that day, and right as the second plane hit, we were all watching it on the TVs in the waiting room. They called my name back. So it still is very emotional for me today. As far as impacting, there were a lot of unknowns, and especially when you're going in for a major procedure like that, and you're already worried about other things. But a very profound effect, and still to this day very upsetting.
20 years ago, when our nation was attacked by terrorists, I was at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is 30 miles north of DC, the Pentagon. I was conducting some training with my Marines, and the moment we understood what was happening, our nation being attacked, life halted. I remember getting home about 2 a.m. the next morning. And from that point forward, life as we once knew it was altered.
So 20 years ago, I was in college. I think I was third year in college. I remember driving to campus that day, and got to campus and nobody was in class. Everything was just kind of different. World of no Twitter and I think all we had was barely Facebook. So I go to the student union and everybody was there watching the news, of course, on the TV. Just a very surreal moment, very eye-opening for sure. I do remember that I had a job working in the mall, and the mall's closed down for a couple days, and everything just kind of stood quiet for a couple days. And it was, again, very eye-opening experience to see that happen.
So when the towers went down, I was 9 years old. I was in fourth grade. I was in my fourth grade class because, but what I remember most of that day is like the confusion. Cause I went to a school like really close to downtown over by University of Houston, and we thought that we were next. We didn't fully understand what was happening, but we thought like that was the end. And I had to fully process my death at the age of 9. At like 8 in the morning. It was not a great time. But that's the biggest thing I remember, is being forced with, we're a major city, we might be next. I am 9.
20 years ago, when our nation got attacked, I was standing duty in Sigonella, Italy. I was MP, that's a military police. And once we understood what was going on, we had to close down the whole base. So nothing came out, nothing entered. And I think I got home by about a day later because, like I said, I was on duty, so we had to shut down the whole base. And life as we known, like we knew, changed forever. And we're still dealing with that today.
When I first heard about the towers, I was teaching class here at South Houston High School. And I took my students to the library to find out what was going on. We heard this building, that one of the twin towers had been attacked. And so I took my kids to the library, and we were watching the tower burning, and we were watching all of that take place. And then the bell rang for class to change, and the kids were moving to the next class. And I remember stepping up to the TV just in disbelief. And right at that time, I got to watch the second tower fall. And that was very heartbreaking to me. Just very heartbreaking to know that all this stuff was going on.
Okay, my name is Miranda Cifuentes. I am the yearbook teacher here at South Houston. I remember September 11th because I was young. I was in Silver Lake Elementary, and I had to go to the nurse's office before I had lunch. And the nurse in there told me that something really bad happened, and her husband works at a place with a lot of computers, and he found out some important information, and I was freaking out, and I was like, well, what happened? And she said somebody flew a plane into some important buildings, and she said, I'm going to give you your medicine, go have lunch, but just know your parents are going to probably pick you up. And I remember we went to lunch, and then little by little kids in my class would get called out. Parents came to pick them up. And I remember at the end of the day, I was the only one in the classroom who was not picked up. And I went to my babysitter's house after school, and they weren't playing the normal channels on channel 20. They were showing the planes flying into the buildings. And when my parents got home, I remember being so mad at them because I was like, why didn't you pick me up? And they both work in the med center, and they said that they had like a code something, I don't know what code it was, but some color code, and that they couldn't leave, so they couldn't pick me up. But that's how I remember September 11th.
I was actually asleep in bed at the time when it happened, and I was having a crazy dream. I saw, y'all are gonna think I'm crazy, but it's okay, shards, and I think, well, looking at it now, I was hearing the alarm in my radio, and one of my friends, I was picturing her on the sidewalk. I was working at the Alley Theater at the time, so I got up and I went to work, and I still had no idea what had actually happened. So I got to work, and my associate asked me if she could have the rest of the day off because she wanted to go pick up her son. She was scared. And I'm like, sure, what's going on? And that's when I found out. So it was very shocking. We were all very scared. I was also attending the University of Houston theater program, and I remember sitting outside of the Wortham Theater there, just sitting on the concrete between classes, thinking, why am I here, and how can the world keep going on?
So yeah, I still remember that day vividly. I think lately we've been watching a lot of the news and all these 20-year anniversary kind of things coming on TV, and so it certainly brings back memories. And I remember I was an 8th grade math teacher at Jackson Intermediate, and I was also an administrative intern, so I was working on my master's degree. And that particular day, of all days, I was asked to help out in the office, right? And subbing in the AP office. We had our principal was out on meetings, and AP's had a couple meetings, and so they needed extra help. And so I remember, just kind of walking down the hallways, and then all of a sudden things sort of got quiet. And I guess at that point, it's not like today where social media was rampant, not like today, but certainly people were getting texts. But one of the things that I think that happened, and unfortunately it was a huge tragedy that occurred, but that tragedy at the same time, I think, brought the country together. And regardless of political views, it brought everybody together towards one mission. And so it kind of, the best of America was shown at that point, in bringing everybody together regardless of political background, of ethnicity, of religious affiliation. Everybody got back together and said, this is something that we need to work on, and certainly we need to do something about this. And we came together and certainly did some great things out of that, for sure.
So I remember being at an administrative meeting at the ad building the day of 9/11, and I remember it vividly. I'm sure everyone does. We were told by Rick Snyder, the superintendent at the time, to return to our campuses, not knowing what to expect, what was next. And we started, of course, seeing parents flood the schools, wanting to take their children home, wrap their arms around them, and just be with their loved ones. I, of course, had a son at Turner Elementary at the time who I had to leave there and trust that they were loving on him and taking care of him, which they were. But I can remember just calming students down, calming teachers down, and just taking care of each other here in Pasadena ISD. As a wife of someone who's a first responder, it was a very difficult time for me, wondering what the world was going to and what we were going to experience next as the United States of America. And now, even 20 years later, as a mom of 2 officers in the military, one in the Army and one in the Navy. You know, my heart goes to the families that, of course, support the United States of America across this nation, and of course know the importance of being in a nation like ours, a free society, and what we have to do to protect that. So again, I think it's amazing when we come together as a work family, but that was a day like no other.
Today, we pay our respects to the fallen, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, daughters and sons, friends and neighbors, heroes who rushed into burning buildings without any hesitation or any regard for their own personal safety. Today, we stand as a South Houston High School community in unity and in remembrance of those who were lost in the attacks and those who still mourn today.